philosophical, sociological, psychological, and political perspectives. The speakers will address and put into context current instances of the death penalty, exploring the dynamics involved in this criminal sanction. The series will present the following themes: the role of women in the abolition of the death penalty, international human rights law, political violence, Islam, legal systems, children, trauma, sociological aspects, as well as nonviolence and forgiveness. Each panel will consist of 2 to 3 panelists, each speaking for about 10 to 15 minutes. The presentations will then be followed by a Q&A period where participants can raise questions to the panelists. The participants can submit their questions via Zoom and on YouTube chat to the moderator, myself today, who will handle the Q&A period. This series right now is being presented simultaneously on YouTube and Zoom. Now, before I move on to the theme for today's first session in the series, we'd like to play a video for you created by our third panelist for today, Omida Milani. This video was created as part of his doctoral dissertation at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. It brings to life the story of a legal case against a young girl in Iran and conveys a message that words and legal jargon just cannot do justice to. Have a look.
The night before the end is a special night. It is like no other night. That night, evanescent moment, where omens of a death, her death, that will be delivered before the dawn, before the city wakes up, before the fresh rays of sun would reach the cold scaffold. Tomorrow, the crime and the punishment will be entangled in the knots of the noose. But that night was only the end of a story that only a pen and a scrap of paper could relate, a story whose conclusion was written long ago by the hands of another human. And with her trembling hand, she wrote her final words, plunging into her sweet and bitter memories. A very small town was where she grew up in. A few buildings, the tallest of which was perhaps a 2-story one, and a mosque were almost all you could see at first glance. Her favorite, though, was the school, where she could learn new things, play with her friends, and show off her childlike smile to the world. Her parents, much like all other parents in the town, were so kind to their child. Neither her mom's big black chador nor her dad's walrus mustache could hide their love for her. When she was old enough, or marriageable as people in the town say, her parents had to think of an ideal husband for her. And who in that small town would ever be better than her cousin? He was older than her, but it wouldn't matter in a righteous marriage. After all, as the old saying goes, cousin's wedlock is bound in the skies. Between the 16-year-old girl and her cousin was a world of difference. And unlike her father, behind her cousin's mustache was never a sweet smile. Soon, everything changed, and she found herself in the midst of an unbearably painful marriage. Every day, she wished she could go home again. Soon, out of luck or misfortune, after only a few weeks, her first marriage was brought to an end, and the man left her for good. But the ephemeral moments of freedom vanished in the twinkling of an eye, and she found herself in a bigger cage, this time as big as her town, whose every corner was now replete with the eyes of people who relentlessly judged her. Life was now more bitter than ever. It was even worse than the worst marriages. Her parents once again came to help her. They knew of a man in the city who was ready to marry a divorced girl. But he lived far from her small town, so she had to leave. She had to leave her home, her now intimidating town, and her once loved school. City was nothing like her small town, with tall buildings whose heads were well above Lord knows cloud or smoke, with horrible swear words everywhere. And she was all alone in the hectic business of the city, desperately looking for her new self. They had almost nothing in common. His stature soon dwarfed her already vanishing dreams. The man who was supposed to let her taste happiness again added another chapter of anguish to her book of life. The gap between them widened every day and night, made her think of suicide every day. One day, she gave in and put a handful of pills in a cup of orange juice to drink and end her miserable life. But she, right before drinking the juice, changed her mind. She thought, why not ridding myself of the man, the evil, who has taken away happiness from my life? After drinking the juice, he felt dizzy and drowsy. Once asleep, she, perhaps for the first time in her life, found herself superior, literally superior over a man. She strangled him to death. And as the sun was rising, the wobbling stool under her feet was already pulled off. To balance the inharmonious scales of justice, she was the only one chosen to pay off. She was the only one to atone. She was the only one to swing on the gallows. Now she could see the sun and hear the crow in everyone. And as she finally flew away, she could see the absent-minded who could not see.
Oh, oh. Thank you so much, um, Omid, for that very powerful video. I will leave it to our second panelist, Hossein Raisi, who told this story to Omid to discuss the video further, and if Omid wants to touch upon it during his uh, during his speech. I'm sorry, the videos made me a little bit discombobulated. Um, I just want to touch briefly before we get to our first panelist on the theme for today. So, the philosophical aspects of the death penalty have been closely examined by numerous thinkers and philosophers. In this particular session, the philosophical foundations of the death penalty, along with ethical arguments for or against capital punishment concerning the abolition of this sanction, will be discussed. The panelists will investigate the role of the state, the sovereign, and existing misconceptions and irrational elements in the discourse on the death penalty, providing a philosophical framework which would necessitate the abolition of capital punishment as an irrational and ineffective practice in different societies, particularly in the contemporary context of the Middle East. Our first panelist for today, Professor Dr. Ramin Jahanbegloo is a political philosopher. He is presently the executive director of the Mahatma Gandhi Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies and the vice dean of the School of Law at Jindal Global University in Delhi, India. Professor Jahanbegloo has been a researcher at the French Institute for Iranian Studies and a fellow at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, and taught at my alma mater in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. He is also a member of the advisory board of PEN Canada. In April of 2006, Mr. Jahanbegloo was arrested in Tehran airport, charged with preparing a velvet revolution in Iran. He was placed in solitary confinement for 4 months and released on bail. Professor Jahanbegloo, thank you so much for joining us. The time is now yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this interesting roundtable. It goes without saying that death penalty is a very important subject, especially because it continues to be practiced by many states around the world, especially in the Middle East. And as we all know, the death penalty is contrary to human dignity, it is incompatible with the right to life, and it does not lead necessarily to justice. But this said, I would like to start my philosophical reflections on the death penalty with a quote from Victor Hugo, the famous French author, who said, I quote him, "The death penalty is a special and eternal sign of barbarity." What Victor Hugo was trying to say was that wherever the death penalty is practiced abundantly as a matter of law and justice, barbarism reigns. But wherever and whenever the death penalty is abolished, we can talk about civilization. The key word civilization for Hugo is something which is inviolable, which means sacrosanctity of human life. For Hugo, the sacrosanctity of human life is the right of all rights. So I think we can start from there. It's a very solid foundation, philosophical foundation against the death penalty. All the principles flow from this one. It is the root principle and not the branch of the tree of existence, actually. In other words, death penalty is the most insolent outrage against human dignity, against civilization, and against the moral progress of humanity. I would say, I'm not talking about the scientific progress, I'm not talking about the technical progress, I'm talking about the moral progress of humanity, as many philosophers in the 18th century believed in that. Hugo, in his novel, The Last Day of a Condemned Man, Le Dernier Jour d'un Condamné, he depicts the cruelty of the capital execution, which he portrays as a judicial murder. I think the concept of judicial murder is very important. It's a correct one because, as another French poet and novelist wrote, the scaffold is not and cannot be the final reason for justice. So, if the capital punishment is not the last reason for justice, what is death penalty? Well, death penalty is simply a justice that kills. We can call it a justice that kills. In other words, the true meaning of the death penalty stems from the idea that the state has the right to dispose of its citizens to the point of taking their lives. And I think that's the very important philosophical point which we need to make. By exercising the right to kill, the state claims to be above the individual and above its rights. As such, the death penalty represents the ultimate exercise of state power, raising profound questions about its legitimacy. I believe we can say that death penalty is a form of institutionalized killing, and as such, it is at odds with the values of a humane and ethical society. That is to say, by giving priority to retribution over justice, the state is transformed from a protector of rights, which is supposed to be, into a violator of rights. This means that the abolition of the death penalty would put the state in its rightful place, which can only be second to the individual and his right to life. Let me turn here to another French author, Albert Camus, who wrote a great deal on the guillotine and the death penalty, and who was a great inspiration for the late French Minister of Justice, Robert Badinter, who was the architect of the abolition of the capital punishment in France in 1981. What is interesting in Camus' position is his support for a justice with compassion. He always talks about the fact that justice cannot go without compassion. The two have to go always together. But also, he underlines the fact that resistance to death penalty should be directed against oneself and against the society. Camus writes especially against the fascination that the death penalty arouses in the individual. I talked about the state, but we have to talk about the societies also, the societies which are fascinated by this, by death penalty, by the killing and by the act of, killing. And here the parallel with Hugo is very striking because they both were traumatized as young boys by the confrontation with the death penalty through their parents. If you have read some of the novels of Albert Camus, you know that he talks about it, and he also in his article on the guillotine, he talks about his father going to a execution and coming back and vomiting, and it put a very difficult position the young Camus. Most of us, as academics, as journalists, as lawyers, as human rights activists, we have never lived such an experience. But we do understand the argument of Camus when he says that the capital punishment pushes the inevitability of death to the extreme and complicates the awareness of human finitude by inflicting a legal death on an individual. Illegal death, which is organized and programmed by the state. So, as you see, I'm trying to somehow theorize how a state which uses death penalty is actually trying to formulate it in different judicial or political terms. In other words, we can say that the capital punishment is nothing but the killing of an individual by a state whose will is expressed through unjust laws and tyrannical rulers. One way or another, the death penalty sharpens death as the ultimate scandal of human life. And what is put here into question is the idea of justice itself. The fact that whenever and wherever we have a justice which is lethal, the state turns into a murderer and into a killing machine. So it would be more correct to talk about a killing machine. Is more correct to talk about what I call thermodynamics of terror. Is more correct to talk about a state which becomes a killer state or a murderer. As such, the justice of death penalty strips violence of its individual character and turns it into a rigorously organized violence. We should not forget that the duty of civil authority to preserve and defend the common good has always been an integral part of the teaching on the lawfulness of the death penalty. The state which practices capital punishment always tries to talk about the lawfulness of the death penalty. So if you consider the death penalty as unlawful and as a negation of the intrinsic human dignity, we need to deny the state its singular prerogative of murdering prisoners and practicing intentional killing. This should undermine the judicial validity of death penalty as a form of punishment, while affirming the lethal punishment cannot be a legitimate expression of any authority, either God or the state. If we all agree that no state has power over the life and death of its citizens, then we can go back to the argument developed by Robert Badinter when he says that we should take the mask off the vigilante state since the citizen has primacy over the state, but also a state which murders its citizens continues to live and to practice politics and justice at the level of infantile maturity. That is to say, the death penalty is nothing but the sign of a society and a state which are unable to go beyond the cruel human sacrifice. So, my philosophical conclusion is to underline the fact that capital punishment is no punishment at all. It is a form of murder. So we should exclude from our considerations on capital punishment the notion of penalty and retain only the idea of killing of a human being. And as such, maintaining or re-establishing the death penalty is a way of legitimizing violence, both morally and politically. So there will be no lasting justice or peace either in our societies or in our hearts until the death penalty is outlawed and excluded from our judicial, political, and philosophical vocabularies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Jahanbegloo. And I really want to come back during the Q&A and touch upon this idea of retribution taking precedence over justice. I think that's a really important topic to come back to. I just want to remind viewers that you can put your questions in the chat here. So please fill up that area. Our second panelist for today is Hossein Raisi. Hossein Raisi is an Iranian lawyer with 20 years spent defending high-profile cases of women, minorities, students, and children at risk of execution. He is the founder and former head of the Human Rights Committee of the Fars Province Bar Association and the Voice of Justice Legal Association in Shiraz, Iran. This sort of work brings increasing scrutiny by the authorities. He came to Canada, where he is now teaching and researching at Carleton University and advising the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and Amnesty International. Mr. Raisi, the time is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate Professor Jahanbegloo for brilliant ideas against the death penalty. I always learn about all formal being against our formal violence from Professor John Bigelow. Let's talk about the girls that you just watched her story at the beginning. I was defense lawyer of her while I was practicing in Iran. She was my client when she just received the death sentence, and I was seeking for amnesty for her for a couple of years, but unfortunately I couldn't get because of the authority and because of the form of retribution instead of form of justice in Iran. Yes, all points that Professor John Bigelow provided for us here have been projected and projecting in the Iranian legal system. I practice and I really touch all those former actually killing people instead of bringing justice to them, as well as the girl that we watch her story. In the Iranian legal system, it's based on the Sharia system. And Shia Sharia system has a huge number of the word and literature, legal literature, to dehumanizing people first and killing them without seeking justice for them and without seeking their lives and all people around them, as well as the society, government, community, and their responsibility about the situation of the perpetrator. Always perpetrators are victim of the system, and it's so easy to kill them instead of bringing justice to them and bringing justice to the society. And to legitimize this kind of killing, you have to have some legal tools, such as constitution and penal code and so on, and also convince the society to not bring any question and challenging you as a system of justice, so-called justice, and just led you to kill someone else. Someone already is a victim of the situation, and you're gonna kill someone else. You're gonna kill a perpetrator instead of bringing justice to society. It means the violence not gonna get to the end in this kind of the system that we are facing in many in some let's say not many countries, because most of the country around the world, they ban the death penalty or abolishing the death penalty at all. And in few countries such as Iran, we have the huge number of the death penalty, unfortunately. And let's see, the life of the girl, it was so simple. And she was looking for education, and she was looking for happiness and nothing else. She was from the poor family, labor family, and she came from that family, and family tried to make the best, but they couldn't because of the system. And when she was facing the death penalty, also the system did not look at her and also look at her family. And first of all, the system dehumanized her. And let's tell a story about the situation. While I was seeking for amnesty for her, I went to an office in the justice office in Shiraz, Iran. And there is an office for supporting children and women rights in the judiciary office. I went there and I got the appointment and went and asking a head of the just that office that it was a woman, a religious woman, and I share the story of the girl case and ask her to help me for amnesty for her. And unfortunately, when I shared her story and about the case with that office, the head of the office said, "No, we are not allowed to go through this case." I asked why. What you are in some different cases, even I asked you and you did help me. I had plenty of the execution and death penalty cases for some women, and I got that. She said, because the victim of this case was a Basiji, a militia, and also he was a member of the staff of the judiciary in public relations. And the head of the judiciary office banned us to and stopped us to even talk with her and even touch her case. And unfortunately, she was only one time in a courtroom with the unfair trial, and then she received the death sentence. When I visited her in a prison, she was so confused as a teenager, as someone need to get help from the society, not waiting for killing every single morning to kill. They decided to kill her. And everyone around her, some different prisoners, they supported her. And sometimes they asking me for something else to get support. I was in contact with the mother and father of her. And they were so kind. They did the best to support her and to keep her alive, but unfortunately they couldn't. And so we have some words in the Iranian legal system, such as mahdur dam. Mahdur dam is Arabic word for deserving to death. Yeah, who can be deserved to death? No one. The system, first of all, make you as a person who deserve to death. First of all, dehumanize of the criminal or perpetrator, whatever, and then deserve to death. And they have a specific literature to give their hands open to put on the life of everyone and killing them, such as enemy of God, such as enemy of the security of the society or state, such as corrupter of the earth, مفسد في الأرض. And such as those legal literatures, unfortunately, open their hands, and somehow they convince the society that for an eye, it's going to be justice. However, this is unjust behavior that we have in the all legal system that they still practice death penalty and retribution, specifically because the Gerd case, it was part of Qisas case and retribution. It's exactly some part of an eye for an eye, and then dehumanize the person and convince the society, convince the family of the victim to kill her instead of amnesty for her or forgiveness, and then everyone gonna go home and next case because they are not accountable to bring justice within the society. So I want to finish up my first round to say if you want to have a society without this uh, official violence against the human, we must go deep to the life of the victim of death penalty. They are a kind of human, same any of us, same as any of people that you can see, you can watch around you. And we do need to listen to their narrative, listen to their lifestyle, and how they put in the way of involving and engaging with the justice system, so-called, that step by step killing them. This is so important to go through their life, and we have to be all against the death penalty all around the world for all kind of crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raisi. I think we'll come back to in the question period also about your experience working within the legal system of Iran. I think that is something that we need to highlight because it must at times felt like just banging your head against a wall, trying to defend people when the law seems to be so black and white and doesn't take people's lived experiences or what the perpetrator as a victim, as you said, is not taken into consideration. Our third panelist for today is Omid Milani. Omid is an expert on state-sponsored violence and human rights law at the University of Ottawa and fellow at the Human Rights Research and Education Center. He treats the many aspects of human rights, legal processes, application of state power, civil and common law, Shia Sharia law as a multidisciplinary process. It's when written and spoken language is deficient in expressing difficult ideas that his work as a multimedia artist and curator takes over. Omid, the time is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizing institutions for giving us this opportunity to discuss the philosophical aspects of the death penalty with a view to its abolition. I would also like to express my gratitude to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Jahan Beglu and Mr. Raisi, for sharing their insights generously with our participants. I would also like to thank our participants today, the attendees who have made time to be here with us today to discuss this significant issue of the abolition of the death penalty. I would like to add a few elements of complexity and share some critical perspectives on the death penalty for further reflection. And I would try to remain concise within 10, 12 minutes. And I look forward to unpacking some of the issues that I introduce during the Q&A period. When I think of the death penalty, a point of departure for me has always been the phrase attributed to Hegel, that which is real is reasonable. So the death penalty is a real issue. So for me, it would be naive to think of it as a violent act that does not merit philosophical investigation and discussion. So I would like to think of it as a real problem and engage with the socio-legal complexities that are underlying this sanction. So reflecting on the death penalty, it immediately appears to me that this sanction is an exceptional sanction. And it is exceptional in so many ways. For instance, it is irreversible. It is absolute. It is so, in the language of Jacques Derrida, it is pathos laden. It involves human suffering and pain to an unspeakable degree. So it enjoys an unspeakable element. One of the reasons why I would like to also involve creative expressions when I deal with the death penalty is the unspeakable aspect of this sanction. And also it is the ultimate expression of the state power, the sovereign, in both pre-Westphalian and post-Westphalian notions. And it also reminds me of a reading of the notion of sovereign that Carl Schmitt has put forth in a descriptive way. We can read his definition of sovereign as one who, he who decides on the exception. And in so many ways, we can see the exceptional elements present in the death penalty, and we can see the victim as one who has been exceptionally excluded from the scope of life and also the realm of law, who has been deemed unworthy of life. And this reminds us of totalitarian regimes and totalitarian states where the power is exercised in an exceptional fashion, where figures of authority and also the state happen to be outside of the realm of law. This is not unprecedented, and this is not unique to so-called Middle Eastern societies. In ancient Roman law, for instance, there was a figure that is discussed in Giorgio Agamben's book, Homo Sacer, who was treated as a kind of scapegoat who happened to be outside of the scope of law. Or as Mr. Reisi mentioned, the notion of Mahdur Dam, one whose blood is wasted or who deserves to be killed with impunity, is also a manifestation of this exceptional expression of the sovereign. And as I said, the ultimate expression of the sovereign exercising power over life and death of its citizens or subjects is when it decides who can live on and who must die. And it does so in an essentialist fashion, meaning that it constantly produces and consumes essentialist categories that would paint the reality of society in a black and white fashion, and thereby ostensibly justify the application of the death penalty. In that sense, again, the definition of the sovereign as a borderline concept that has brought to us by Carl Schmitt is applicable and relevant in this regard. And there is a book of poetry by Friedrich Nietzsche called Vogelfrei that discusses this category. You can call it a no class. It's not a class of humanity because it's outside of the notion of class at all. It's outside of the whole scope of law and order as typical scapegoats in European societies. And also we have had this numerous examples of this notion throughout our history. When Mansour al-Hallaj, for instance, is put to death, is brought to the scaffold for the excuses such as being or initiating a rebellion against the state and so forth, sedition and so forth. So this is an angle that we need to look at when we want to think about the abolition of the death penalty, because the abolition of this sentence will come it is concurrent with changes in the notion of sovereign. As I mentioned, this is a pre-Westphalian or post-Westphalian notion of sovereign, that the state is above its so-called subjects, and it can exercise its power over life and death. It can decide what it merits to live on and what deserves to be killed, as I said, in an essentialist fashion. The core of politics in that sense is la vie nue, or mere life, or what in German philosophy is referred to as das bloße Leben, or life itself. So in retentionist states where the death penalty is carried out, the state exercises a totalitarian sense of power in defining what constitutes legitimate life and what merits who merits to be killed. And so to question the penalty and also to move towards its abolition, we need to question the essentialist core of the state in that sense, and this sovereignty of the state in an essentialist fashion. So to break down the essentialist categorizations of friend and enemy, for instance. You know that in the vocabulary and in the language of retention states, there's always this recurring term of the enemy that is used and abused to justify the resort of the state to lethal force. To debunk these simplified categorization, I think we need to adopt a queer approach towards such essentialist categorizations of man versus woman, of enemy versus friend, and so forth, and try to see how we can reconcile these categories and thereby remove the ground that will give rise to state violence, particularly in the case of the death penalty. And as many of you may know, this in retention states resort to the death penalty out of insecurity. They are insecure in many ways. The state perceives itself or promotes itself as a timeless and deathless entity. And as light on its own is invisible and it needs some sort of shadow for being seen and being perceived, the state tries to reproduce its opposite notion, meaning the death in some form, and thereby to indicate its opposite and to let people see what the state purports not to be. And in the language of Jacques Derrida, the state lets itself be seen or becomes apparent in the case of capital punishment, il sauvoir. And in that sense, we can understand why we have public execution or executions happen during the day, not during the night, and so on and so forth. So I think I gave a couple of observations and critical perspectives on the death penalty, and I look forward to discussing these aspects further during the Q&A period. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Omid John. Sorry, Omid Milani. I apologize if I keep saying John. I want to start first off. We do have a couple of questions, but I'm urging people to put more questions inside the chat. I want to start off with a question to Dr. Jahanbegloo, and looking at the arena of Iran and the way in which public executions are treated as a sort of theater, a spectacle. And I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit of how, and I don't know if this is something you can speak to or if any of the other guests want to take this on, but of how a public execution is almost made into a theatrical event where people are invited to, or the citizenry is invited to sort of take part in it. And what impact do you think that that has on a society? I believe you're muted, Mr. Jahanbegley.
Okay. Sorry. I think this is a very important question because there are two sides which has been discussed by actually political philosophers in the modern times about how the art of appearing to each other is actually could be a citizenship element, but at the same time, its opposite and its negation can be also that you have public executions or public killing, as we had it also in medieval times, like burning the sorcerers. You had the killing of Jeanne d'Arc, and it was always done in public. I think it's very, very close to the idea of retribution because actually, as Omid was saying very correctly, and this is one of the, I think, hypotheses which has been discussed in modern philosophy about both on citizenship, but also about laws and about the sovereignty, about the sovereign, is that we are dealing with a state which wants to dissuade people from acting against it. So when they want to make it public, is actually you have a sovereign state which is coming out and saying to the people, you don't have any natural rights. It's a very Hobbesian actually state saying you don't have any natural rights. So you gave us you gave up all your natural rights actually to the state. So it's the state which decides who has to die and who has to live. And I think that this has been a very, I mean, Iran is, of course, a very good example of it, as it has been practiced always in public. I mean, you have the death penalty, which has been practiced in public, and you had, we can talk also about the stoning of women that it has been done also in Iran in public. But I think that very shortly, the main idea is that we are dealing here with laws like religious laws in Iran or in Taliban or elsewhere, or we had military laws in Latin America and elsewhere, where it undermines in this sort of execution the dignity of the individual. And it tries to somehow, as I said, it tries to dissuade citizens from fighting for their freedom. But at the same time, uh, its death penalty is used as a valid punishment during the process of I would say exchange of power, and it has been practiced in many ways. So I think that this is one of the angles that we can discuss it, and it's very important to talk about it.
Yeah, I was wondering about it in the sense that, you have a participatory polity, meaning that the state is almost saying to the citizens, you are a part of this retribution. You know,
Yes.
if I could go to you, Mr. Raisi, just a question about the and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like in the current legal system in Iran, the uh, perpetrator and the victim or the victim's family is almost put in the driver's seat of retribution. So it, unlike other systems that we have in other countries, I, as a victim's family member, would have the right to pardon a murderer, whereas you may not see that in other systems. And I found that really interesting because it's almost like it puts the victim's family members in the driver's seat. So you can, I'm hoping you can talk to us about something called blood money, and the role that plays in the legal system in Iran right now. I think it's DA in if I'm not mistaken, like blood money. What is that, and what role does that play?
That's a great question because in Iranian legal system, unfortunately, it's copied exactly based on Quranic law and Sharia law, and which is qisas as a right of the people, and they have the vague interpretation of the qisas right, and also they put in a way that that the government and the power would need it. And the most important thing is to put the hands of the people and specifically of the family of the victim in the blood of the perpetrator, and the society take away from some pressure that may get when killing someone, and leave it to the family of the victim, which is retribution and increasing retribution sense of the people to kill or pardon perpetrator. And it made something strongly wrong to put bargaining between the family of victim and the perpetrator to talk about the dia or blood money, and get some money, and then forgiveness and clemency is part of the argument between them, and bargaining, unfortunately, this yeah, about that. And in the Iranian legal system, exactly Article 290 of the Iranian new penal code and the rest, exactly it's based on the interpretation of the Sharia and different kind of the three kind of the first degree murder we have, and in all of them, the society just put the perpetrator in the position of the death, with the sentence to death, and then leave it to the family, and shared with the family its responsibility about the situation, and killing people by the family of the victim, which is so wrong. And in the modern law, it's not acceptable. And we do need to go through the details of each specific cases, because justice has details of the background, details of the situation. But in this situation, only they look up to the crime, and the crime situation, crime scene, no more. No background, no check the maturity, no check the ability, no check the society and supporting from the authority, and then no check for prevention of the crimes and prevention program in the society, then killing the perpetrator by family of the victim, which is qisas. And sometimes the family of the victim can give the perpetrator forgiveness, and sometimes not. And it's made exactly somehow society in a kind of war to each other, family of the perpetrator, and sometimes some high profile artists or whatever go and get the support from the perpetrator, and in some cases never ever get happen this situation, because the perpetrator is unknown unknown person. No one cared about him or her. And then even in some situation, people would like to this perpetrator being execution in the public. We had just recently a lawyer who has been killed, and then the family and some, unfortunately, some lawyers and the society, and in a small city of Neshabur, they were together and asking for the public execution of that perpetrator, and no one asking for the asking for blood money or something else or forgiveness. It means it's unjust society, unjust situation. Go with the very fundamental or inhuman law as a qisas and practice that kind of law, Sharia law, and sharing the responsibility of the modern society with the with the family of the victim and with the people. Yeah, that's it. My perspective about the Iranian even constitution, legal constitution, and penal code and criminal procedural law, all is about. But the most important thing is all execution when it's going to get happen must be signed. We have a word for this as a stizan. Stizan is the Arabic word in Iranian legal system. It means the final signature for execution. Anyone, it's on hands of the Wali Faqih, Iranian supreme leader, that he gives to the head of judiciary, according Iranian procedure, criminal procedural law. He gives to the head of the judiciary, and all execution, no matter qisas or muharebe or political prisoner, whatever, the final signature is on the hand of the supreme leader that he gives to the Mr. Ejei. Currently, he is the head of the judiciary in Iran.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to some of the questions here in the chat. But before I do, I just have a question also for Omid. Omid, I'm wondering if you could talk about, just picking up off of what Mr. Raisi said about the role of the citizens in this case, particularly within the framework of Iran. Citizens who go and watch these executions, these public executions, and the impact that has on a society. Because and I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here, from the state's perspective, they do these executions publicly as a deterrent, they say, so that if everyone sees what the cost is of stealing, if your hand is getting cut, maybe you'll think twice about stealing. And that's sort of how it's presented to the public. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think it's an important aspect of the death penalty to speak of the public execution as a form of, I would say, that used to be common and is less common now in Iran, but still is practiced. And I think we should know that not everyone goes to a public execution to rejoice at the scene. So it's not for the sake of seeing or enjoying the spectacle that people appear at public executions. Nevertheless, the state uses public executions to manufacture a kind of economy of terror and death politics, and as Achille Mbembe says, kind of necropolitics, so that it would terrorize societies and deter or attain some sort of deterrence. But the point is that I always want to think of the death penalty in terms of its human aspects. So
there's always a human involved, whether the victim or the soldier who is put to pull the chair, or the judge, the lawyers, the public. There's always a human aspect, an irreducible human aspect in all capital cases. And that's, I think, where we can sow the seeds of abolition, because I trust that humans are capable of engendering some sort of bond that would overcome hierarchical, categorical, essentialist expressions of power that would necessitate the use of violence. So I'm not sure if individuals are addressed, if humans are addressed, and their perspectives as to the death penalty has changed, the public execution would function in the way that the state desires. And this is similar to what has happened during the Middle Ages in Europe, where the individuals who were put to death were not seen as felons or criminals. They were seen as heroes. And that's when the death penalty is no longer beneficial, so to speak, for the state. So what I'm really interested in is that human aspect, that human potential that can tackle the death penalty in a different way, and can reconstruct the whole power structure that gives rise to violent state-sponsored sanctions such as the death penalty.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go to a question here, and then I'd like to have Aubrey Harris, who is listening in, join us. Aubrey is from the Abolition of the Death Penalty with Amnesty Canada. But I'm going to go first to a question here in the chat from, I think it's Jaime or Jamie, I'm not sure, Bolanos, who says, quote, "I understand that advocating for the complete abolition of the death penalty would be the easiest thing to do. However, it seems like countries that still practice these methods do not see the perpetrators, criminals, as human or deserving of empathy. For example, gay individuals, women, etc., because of draconian religious laws and beliefs. Could perhaps we make more progress abolishing the death penalty if we first campaign to humanize these groups to Middle Eastern cultures?" Before I put this to any of the panelists, I just want to say here to Jaime, this is not something that is just part of Middle Eastern cultures. The United States of America has one of the highest death rates of capital punishment in the world, and they are not a Middle Eastern culture or a theocracy. Having said that, who would like to take on this question of the three panelists? The idea that if you campaign to humanize perpetrators, perhaps that would go towards the abolition of capital punishment.
I can say that this series that we started up from today exactly started with some narrative from the perpetrators, and we are focusing on perpetrators' lives and lifestyles and their family and their desire, their happiness, their sadness, and whatever, and which is the way that we are going to touch exactly some part to share with beneficiaries that, first of all, we have to be equal, we have to be human, and we have to stop against some sort of the authorities and legal system and even societal system that try to dehumanize criminals or human and then kill them. It was my perspective.
Does anyone else want to take that on, the sort of the humanizing of the perpetrators as a way of dealing with the first portion of abolishing the death penalty?
Can I say something?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. I think that the question is much more complex that just about humanizing. I think that it has to do with giving power to the citizens, and that the citizens feel that They appear to each other as not powerless, but as powerful. And it has all to do with the fact that a society which wants to abolish the death penalty has to understand that retribution is not justice and it's not lawfulness. And we have to arrive at this level of maturity, because what we've been discussing about is that states which apply capital punishment is kind of an apparatus with different dimensions. You have a moral justification of killing. You have retribution is actually produced and pronounced as ethical and just. You can have a theological justification like in Iran or in Taliban, and it means that it's God's will. You can have a state justification, which means the sovereign is right, and it can kill its enemies. Uh, and the most important is that it's always you have the state sanctioning the killing as a prelude for fighting against future enemies, and preparing itself for future killings. So there are all these levels of of justification, which is very, very important. It's part of this apparatus when we're talking about the death penalty. It's not. It took. Look at a country like France. It took them so long to abolish the death penalty. 1981. Actually, it's not. It's just 40 years ago. Why did it take them so long? Because I think the French society changed, and the view of the citizens as powerful people in a democracy that they can decide, and the state is not the only decision maker, uh, pushed the socialist government to abolish the death penalty.
Omi, do you have any words on this? Or
Yes, if I may quickly add, I think to disarm the state's ideological apparatus, we need to question categorical and essentialist narrative that the state put forth. And for doing so, I think storytelling will humanize the discourse. So once we understand that the victims of the death penalty are humans with so much socio-legal, economic, and other kinds of complexities involved in their lives, we would not dare judge them as the absolute responsible for their deeds. And we will see the role that, for instance, families play or schools play in their conduct. So these superficial understanding of absolute individual responsibility that is born out of atomized understandings of the individual in modern philosophy has to be debunked. And also art and storytelling will help us humanize the discourse and will help us see that no one is in such a position to take someone's life, whether for retribution or for the sake of maintaining or perpetuating the state power, things like that. So I think these are powerful strategies to disarm the ideological apparatus of the state.
I find it really interesting too, the way Dr. Jahanbegloo sort of compartmentalized and showed that depending on the system, it could be God's will that is, meting out this form of retribution, or it's the state. But it seems like it's always naturalized, like this is the natural order of things. You commit this crime, and this is the punishment for it. I think it's really interesting how you want to almost act as a bulwark against that. The question being, what's it going to take to move the needle on that? Pardon the pun. There's a comment in here from Jaime Bolano saying, "Thank you. I'm aware it is practiced worldwide, but I thought this meeting was focused on Middle Eastern countries context." Sorry. No need to apologize. I just wanted to put it out there that this, because at times it's framed that, this is sort of as I said, the natural order of things, or this is somehow cultural or something that has been always done. No, these are systems of power that come and go. And I think it's important to point that out. There's another question here from Farhat. International law, which governs armed conflicts, allows for equal and proportional counterattacks. Could it be that, in a sense, those who are subject to the death penalty are seen as being, quote, at war with the state and its laws? Who would like to take that on?
If I may quickly jump in, I would say that the victims of the ones who are subject to the death penalty are definitely challenges to the state sovereignty. And that's exactly why these sovereign states reacts to individuals who challenge the authority of the state sovereignty. And because they transgress the line that is drawn by the state sovereign in an essentialist way, the states cannot tolerate such an act of stepping over the line. And that's how you can also frame it as it's being at war with the state, but definitely in conflict with the sovereign state.
Mm. Would anyone else like to take this on? Is this idea of the perpetrators being at war with the state?
Well, I would say that in addition to what Omid said correctly, I would add also the dimension of dissent. A sovereign state, a Hobbesian state, I would say, a state which does not recognize the natural rights of its citizens, does not tolerate dissent, any form of dissent. And that's why the death penalty has been always a way of somehow dissuading dissent in a manner of dissent here is not necessarily revolt, but it's an act of questioning coming from the citizen. So you should not question the laws. You should not, either the laws of God or the laws of human beings or the laws of the sovereign. So you cannot act against it and you cannot question it. So therefore, this apparatus of killing and murdering is always there to show you that you cannot be a dissenter, you cannot be a questioner. You cannot be an intellectual, you cannot be a feminist, you cannot be an artist who, in the manner of what Omid has done, caricaturizes, the act of killing of a state, of a theological state like Iran, or a military state. So I think that the dissuasion, the fact of pushing back every form of dissent is very, very important to understand.
I'd add to what Ramin is saying as well, that kind of ironic that I think the experience of many under a totalitarian regime is nasty, brutish, and short. So to bring up Hobbes.
Is that Aubrey?
This is Aubrey. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So apologies. So we've asked Aubrey Harris to join us from Amnesty Canada. Aubrey, you put something in the chat talking about China following Mao's revolution, where they had mandates to carry out a specific number of executions in extreme numbers, sort of regardless of the crimes in the years following the revolution. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? So this.
Yeah, it is something that I read a few years ago. There is a textbook on death penalty in China, and it spoke about each kind of successive year, and each region had to carry out very large numbers of executions. They didn't really say for what crimes. It just said you have to do 2,000 executions here, 1,000 there. Really crazy numbers. And just following the revolution in China, which was just as we are developing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights internationally. It sort of flies in the face of that time period. But I brought it up because there was earlier comments about, the exertion of state control and using executions as a demonstration of power, kind of regardless, to silence people and oppress. And China, like Iran, has this history. Both extreme numbers, both using it for state power, with really very little discrimination into what really is a capital crime.
So the idea of filling a quota almost during that time.
It literally was back then.
I want to come back to this idea of the moral progress of humanity and the abolishing of the death penalty. I'm sitting in Canada. There is no death penalty here. But I want to come back to this idea of putting victims and victims' families in the driving seat. How do you sort of do away with that system if as the state says, and again I'm playing devil's advocate here, they are just a reflection of what their citizens want. So a state like Iran would say our citizenry wants the death penalty. You know, how do you change society when you have a state that imposes, you know, such a thing as God's will being, you know, the death penalty being God's will? It's a big question. It's a big question about changing society, right? When you have a state that says, no, we're just reflecting the needs of the citizenry. This is what they want. If they didn't, they wouldn't come out to watch. They wouldn't support it.
Singapore's made similar statements as well, claiming popular support for their, use of the death penalty. I think, though, one of the challenges is really because of state control over popular media. You won't often hear the voices of the victims' families that don't want executions. There are those groups in Iran, in the United States, probably in Singapore, just around, but we don't hear those voices. We generally hear the dominant narrative being the prosecutors and the state's narrative. It's very hard to get the other voices heard. We're very lucky that we do get the voices out. Groups like Journey of Hope, really excellent group of people, Murder Victims Fund for Human Rights. I'm reminded of the Iranian boy who was executed. Or it wasn't. There's a story of him playing his flute on the gallows when being forgiven, and then there was a delay. Maybe somebody else can speak to that story, because I'm just it's slightly reminded my mind, and I know it's several years ago.
Mr. Raisi, can you speak to that case?
I think he's talking about the Behnoud. You're talking about the Behnoud case. Yeah, Behnoud Shujai's case. He was executed, unfortunately, in Tehran prison. Yeah, many people, even many artists, they were involving to get amnesty for him. And his lawyer spent 1 year in a jail because of the case, because he said Qisas is inhuman law. Because of this word, his lawyer spent 1 year in a prison in the Behnoud case. Yeah.
And what do you think of this idea of how do you change the citizens' minds about the death penalty?
I learned from Professor John Beglew that a citizen must ask themselves about the benefit of everything and the law exactly. And we would need to have public awareness in different ways, and we would need to study some similar societies such as Malaysia, Indonesia, as a Muslim countries that they abolishing the death penalty, and Turkey next to us. And also we would need to go through the some literature of the death in the world, and philosophical perspective, and asking ourselves why and how we are responsible with any single execution that we have in Iran. Yeah, I know we don't have the democratic system in Iran, but somehow the Islamic regime share its responsibility to bring justice to society, instead of killing and sharing with the citizens. we have to stop. We have to, first of all, we have to stop, go and watch the public execution. We have to stop and support all kind of the execution, not only political execution and somehow, but we have to asking ourselves first of all, and then go through some literature and go to and study more, and we would need to study more. And I know Chekhov has the best story about the abolition, how abolishing the death penalty, and we would need to go and practice those first, and then public awareness is so important, and we have to be aware that all kind of supporting and even being silent, it's some kind of advocating killing citizens.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to take this on, this idea of how do you change, I don't want to say hearts and minds, but I'm going to say hearts and minds of people to have a different perspective and to push for the abolition of the death penalty?
I would like to say something. I think it would be very wrong of us to judge populations according to their states. In many countries around the world today, Iran being a good example of it. You were talking about moral progress. I actually mentioned also the word moral progress.
Yes.
I think Iranian civil society has done its moral progress much more than the Iranian state. And there is a huge difference between the Iranian state and Iranian civil society. Especially, I would talk about Iranian women. Iranian women are already at a level of civic maturity, which I don't think that the Iranian state is. So the only problem is that, when we are talking about entities, civic entities, which are powerful morally, powerful philosophically, but they are not powerful politically. And of course, they don't have the monopoly of changing things. So we might, this is what has happened in many countries around the world. Look at Latin America or other places in the Middle East still going on. I think that there is a point where the civil society, which is standing apart and is in dissent against the sovereign state, would become as powerful as being able to change a society. And at that level, we can say that a society has become more mature, and its state has to follow its civil society.
Yeah, the gap has really widened between the government and the people in Iran in that respect, for sure. Omi, do you have any thoughts on this, on sort of what to do in terms of changing people's hearts and minds? I mean, in Iran, it seems people are moving away from this. The campaign to abolish the death penalty is quite strong inside Iran.
Yes, just to add to what my colleagues Ramin and Hussein mentioned, I think one of the revolutionary aspects of human rights is to see the sovereign as individual, is to replace the state as the sovereign. And that has been a revolutionary aspect of human rights. So that can logically help individuals see themselves not under the authority of a oppressive regime, but endowed with dignity and human rights that is not granted to them by a higher source of power. Individuals are, by means of being human, enjoying human rights, the right to life, and so on and so forth. And they do not, these rights need to be recognized by their governments, but they are not granted to them. So this is a very significant shift in the notion of sovereignty. And also, we need to reconstruct how we understand power. The way we understand power has been historically predominantly hierarchical. But that is not the only way power can be understood and exercised. because our political systems and also legal systems, most of them have, if not all of them, have been literally man-made, that notion has been commonplace. But we have also relational power that is uh, uh, capable of transforming the discourse on the death penalty. That is not hierarchical. That does not necessitate the use of violence. We need to question this instrumentality of violence in our socio-legal systems, whether violence at all is necessary or not. We have spoken of the right to kill, but let's not forget that one of the ways that the states exercise their right to kill is during wars, and by exposing their citizens, their so-called soldiers, to the danger of being killed. And also that's a way of exercising the right to kill. And also among retentionist states like Japan, United States, we see the exercise of the right to kill and that hierarchy of power at an international level. So this is a global concern. This is a universal concern that must come in harmony with transformation of how we understand power in general and whether violence is necessary at all. For me, any punishment in any criminal system is a failure of law and politics. It is when law has failed to have a citizen live in harmony with the rest of the society, so that it resorts to a violent punishment. So these ways, I think, would change the way we approach the death penalty in Iran, in Southwest Asia, and the rest of the world.
Thank you so much. There is a question from Marianne Northeast in the chat. She says, how much do you think international pressure can play on changing a country's stand on abolishing the death penalty? How much of a role does pressure play, Dr. Jahanbegloo?
I think, well, it depends on the pressure. What kind of pressure are we talking about? Is it economic pressure? Is it political pressure? Is it somehow trying to restrain the powers of the state, of the sovereign, internationally? I think that it does play an important role, but at the same time, I wanted to add something to that, because I think that that goes back to the work I have been doing for the past 30 years in my life, which is actually trying to introduce nonviolence to Iranian society. When we're talking about capital punishment, we're talking about also structural violence in a society which either accepts the death penalty or it doesn't try to fight against it. For example, in the film that we saw by Omid, you have the problem. It starts actually with the marriage itself, I think, which is part of the structural violence. I mean, you have the violence coming from the husband already before the state is there and practices its own violence, and then you have the death penalty. So I think that one of the most important aspects is in different societies which are trying to get rid of the death penalty, but also trying to have this, what we were talking about, this moral progress in society, is to fight against their structural violence. It's not to accept any form of violence which is practiced among the citizens themselves. It's actually going against it even in the popular culture, where you have lumpens which are become heroes of a society. I think the tragedy of a society like Iran, it has been because this has started during the Shah's regime, actually. It was a society which was where you could find violence structurally, and of course, it was somehow in size, it became larger and larger, and the theological regime, the theocracy actually took it over. So this is very, very important.
Does anyone else want to speak to that? The sort of what role international pressure can play on changing a country's stand on abolishing the death penalty?
If I may, I would like to add something in order, not pressure on the government. I know somehow it can happen, but international community or in general international can support Iranian civil society. To improve Iranian civil society, we can take a step to go to the justice. This is the best way to go and support Iranian civil society. Unfortunately, in this part, we don't have enough support from the international in community to take care of the Iranian in general and Iranian civil society in different ways. Always Iranian government share with international community that we have own law. We practice own law, but they don't ask how you justifying this law and how you ratifying that law. It is part of the rule of law system. They should bring big question within the Iranian authority about their rule of law system, because all laws are not follow up the rule of law system that we have in the international law. And the other side that, as I mentioned, I would like to emphasize again that Iranian civil society needs more to get support.
I'd like to add a couple of thoughts on examples where we
Sure.
have had international influence that have adjusted countries' attitudes towards the death penalty, be it moving towards abolition or doing further restrictions. One that immediately comes to mind was China when they were hosting the Olympics. They have claimed, there's no evidence because they won't give us numbers, but they have claimed to have reduced the number of executions by introducing more stages, more requirements before an execution is carried out, with some exceptions. They have the immediate death penalty, but still that has to go through and get passed by their Supreme People's Court. But other examples would be Rwanda. They abolished the death penalty because other countries would not extradite prisoners who were wanted by Rwanda, as a really good example of, international pressure adding to their completely abolishing the death penalty. I would also think of Russia's moratorium on the death penalty, which I think was probably because they are competing with the European Union for popular opinions on the death penalty. When they're compared to Europe, the citizens especially on the European end of Russia, are probably looking at Europe going, that place looks not too bad. So, Russia's had in place an official moratorium on, official executions, at least. So we have that element as well. Those are all examples. And finally, at the UN with the moratorium resolutions at the General Assembly, we have seen a progression as countries work in the back end to try and get more countries co-sponsoring and voting in favor of this resolution. And I think that has had an impact. The Philippines, I think, is one that's kind of gone up and down different times, but I think they've probably been feeling some of the pressure at the UN that way. Now, it's not going to work for every country. I think probably as we see more countries in regions abolish the death penalty, like we're seeing in Africa, and some of Asia as well now, I think you'll see more pressure simply because of regional influence gradually moving towards more openness to abolishing the death penalty. I think as some countries see the death penalty in countries nearby that aren't having extreme crime rates or those situations, starting to realize, it's feasible. Even individual states in the United States, gradually moving towards abolition for various reasons, and it's good to see. Now, under the current administration there may be a bit of a rollback on that, certainly with the executive orders that came out, but we will see. There's always hope.
We have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to pose a question about, because we're speaking specifically about the Mideast region, about governments that, in Iran's case, that's like a totalitarian theocracy, but governments that frame their use of capital punishment through a cultural lens, and will tell countries that may critique their use of capital punishment as saying, you are being biased towards us, you are, looking at us through a Western lens. What do you make of that?
Well,
We've
this has to do with what we call cultural relativism, which was already there in 1948 when the United Nations was adopting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, you had it with the Anthropological Association of America. They were against this declaration. So I think it's this discourse is always there. You have this nativist discourse, which is always there when you start criticizing a government by saying, you have been practicing uh, uh, um, laws which go against the Declaration of Human Rights, and they would come out and they say, well, we don't believe in that. We have our own declaration. You know that there has been tentatives to have an Islamic Declaration of Human Rights. That was in 1980s, or simply like in the case of the Chinese government, you come out and say, well, we don't believe in it at all. So that's always a problem that I think that we face when we're discussing with states which apply capital punishment, and they don't go back to the Declaration of Independence of Human Rights, and they certainly don't agree with it. But I just wanted to, since only 1 minute, because I have to let the others talk also.
Yes.
I just want to talk about the future. We cannot finish this meeting without talking about the future. I think that in the case of societies like Iran, it's very important to prepare the future for a society without death penalty. And one of the things that we can do is to put pressure on the opposition groups in exile and opponents who to sign a petition saying that they are for the abolition of death penalty in Iran. This is something which was not done with the Iranian Revolution of 1978-79, and people entered this revolution by certainly agreeing, accepting the fact that, well, they can be death penalty. And so this is one of the aspects that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as you pointed out, so that this widening gap, civil society has gone beyond the government in this respect and really progressed in a way that the government doesn't seem to have done. I mean, as you pointed out, Dr. Jahanbegloo, or I think it was Omid actually, who said public executions are getting less and less. You saw a lot more public executions, public hangings, people's limbs being cut in Iran in the 1980s through the 90s and early 2000s, but that is happening to a much lesser degree now. It seems the government there is starting to realize, not because they don't believe in it, but it's not good for PR, right? The public image of the state is being eroded by that. Does anyone else want to take on this idea of the future and what we can see in terms of the abolition of the death penalty within the region?
If I may, I would like to, I have a special thanks for Ramin that brought up this part. And the future of Iran is so important because talking about the abolishing death penalty is important for the future of the society of Iran. And we have a strong movement against the death penalty in Iran. And also, I would like to share, at least we have two books against the Quranic law, Qisas law, which are published by Siddiq Wasmaqi and Imaduddin Baqi. Both of them, they are Muslim scholars, and both of them, they criticizing justification of the government, your Islamic government, of the qisas, right of the qisas. And because most of the time clergies and high-ranking clergies in Iran brought up the qisas word and from the Quran and justifying the most of the execution in Iran. And both of them in those books, they criticizing, which is the qisas is not law for killing in murder cases. Qisas is something for equality of the society for both sides, not for killing each other to have the better society. And they exactly, some Muslim philosophers also, they brought it up that Quranic law is not existing. Quran is not book of the law. And we have to open those discussion within the some sort of the society that support religious part of this government. And for the future also, we do need to practice that eye for an eye, it's not the law and is not the justice and fairness. Justice without the fairness, as Ramin mentioned, without the compassion, it's not existing, and it cannot bring the fairness to the society. And in the future, justice is not blind. Justice has open eyes on everything and must practice even from now to bring justice to the society and respect the human dignities of everyone in Iran, no matter you are from the LGBTQs, from the ethnic minorities, from the religious minority, whatever you believe or non-believer. We have to practice some sort of the modern thinking and modern. I don't want to say, oh, modern is from the Western. Is modern exactly the law that we have, such as something that we have in the human rights mechanism, that we have everything together in the human rights mechanism that we can practice as, and next to have the democratic system for future of Iran.
Thank you so much. Omi, do you want to touch on this in the last 2 minutes, just about the future?
Sure. I think adding to what my colleagues mentioned, I think we should be careful not to reduce human rights to a nationalistic project. The implication of the state is, I would say, an extant reality of a pre-human rights era that we are still grappling with. When the state resorts to cultural relativism or thinks of its own territories as its backyard where it can violate human rights, it is abusing the notion of state sovereignty that was established long before, after the Westphalian peace treaty, and has been respected in international law since then. But human rights is not a nationalistic project. When I am here in Canada, I can be as concerned about the abolition of the death penalty in Iran as its abolition in Saudi Arabia. There is no distinction to be made between a Saudi Arabian citizen and also an Iranian citizen from a human rights perspective. The fact that they are both human means that they enjoy the right to life. So I think part of the spirit of human rights is to expand our consciousness, to embrace humanity beyond our borders and territories. I don't think I'm defined by these territories and borders. And I think the future of Iran, the so-called Middle East, that also qualifies as a colonial term, the Southwest Asia, I would say, is in this vision that we see humanity not confined within constructs that are abused by state sovereignty to violate human rights. So I think that's part of the paradigmatic shift that will take place, has already taken place, and we will redefine how, or it would go beyond definition and definitionalism that is commonplace in legal scholarship and so forth, to see the region in a different way, and to see the abolition of the death penalty in all countries and the regions in Southwest Asia.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone to joining us today. Thank you everyone online, and thank you to all of the sponsors today for putting this webinar together. I just want to remind everyone that this is the first of 10 sessions that are going to happen. The next one will be on March 8th, and we'll be looking at women and the death penalty. Thank you to everyone again, and we hope you can join us on March 8th.